Okay, so the bio part. Let's do it this way. Let me just give you the general outlines of the life history. Let's put it that way. And from that life history, maybe then you can pick up certain parts, and we can go deeper on these, and I can share some of my experiences of how I took certain decisions at what time and why I took those decisions and so forth. I started with an intense interest in the environment, my life as a young person, and ended up doing research at the age of 10. It was related to birds primarily. I was interested in birds and identifying birds. But when I was looking at birds, I discovered something at that age. That was a discovery. Is they're eating something in the water. So then the question was, what are they eating in this water? So I took some samples of the water, put them under a microscope, and boom, a whole nother world just emerged under that microscope. I mean, there were diatoms, rotifers, blue-green algae, you name it. It was an incredible, world in there, in that little drop of water. So what happened then, I started studying planktons, and I ended up writing a research paper and then a thesis on the seasonal variations of plankton assemblages in a marsh system. And then that research was published when I was around 17 in the premier ecology journal in Turkey, which was called, well, it's not important what it was called. So anyway, then after working, while I was taking all these samples with planktons, I discovered another thing. There were some insects that were in the water. I mean, I had seen insects at home, in the forest, I don't know where, but I hadn't seen insects in the water. So that was a huge surprise, that there were actually insects in the water. And these insects were also crazy because there was one which was called the water boatsman. It would be like upside down, and then it would be rowing like this in the water. I mean, an incredible species. And then I didn't know that there were this big ones, and then there were this small ones, and both insects and even in the same order. So that was kind of very interesting. So I ended up studying water insects after planktons. And that took me about 2 years. And I discovered 5 new species for Turkey, which hadn't been recorded for the country at all at the time. And then I ended up writing, and I started working with the Max Planck Institute in Germany at the time, because these insects were quite rare and they weren't getting any samples whatsoever. So we started working together and collaborating with them, with the Max Planck Institute. And also there was a professor of entomology at RGS University. So then I published my thesis on the water insects. I was around, I think, at the time 17. Yes, I was 17. And then that got published the year later, again, in a very important journal. So I ended up finishing my high school years with having immersed myself truly into field ecology, and especially aquatic ecosystems. But when you start studying something, you have to learn about the whole thing, right? You can't just learn a little piece, you have to learn the bigger piece. So was university time. So what do I study? I said, of course, I'm going to study ecology. So I went to, like they do here in the US, that wasn't very known at the time in Turkey. You wouldn't go and shop for departments. I love that concept here, because here students go from one school to the other. They get to talk to the professors, they get to know the university, and then they make an informed decision on where they're going to be happy, right? So that's what I did as well. So I started visiting universities one by one, going to the biology departments. The first one that I stopped I thought was the best one, Boğaziçi University in Turkey, very prestigious school. I said, ecology, biology department? We don't study ecology. We are great in genetics. I said, okay, well, genetics, not really. That's not what I'm interested in. Okay, then let's go to the second best. I went to Middle East Technical University. They said, oh, you're welcome to come. We study microbiology. I said, oh, I don't know that I want to study really microbiology. And then I went to the third one, which was Hacettepe University. I went there and asked them, and they said, interesting. There was Professor Ali Demirsoy, a very eminent zoologist. He said, Uygar, I've been following your work. He said, there's nothing we can teach you here. Go away. So I ended up saying, what do I do with my life? Nobody. What am I going to do? It's pitiful, pitiful. Nobody wants me, or what they give me, I don't really like. So I said, okay, then I'm going to study outside, abroad. So I looked at all the programs in the UK, because UK seemed like close enough. I didn't have to cross the Atlantic to the US and so forth. So I looked at all the departments in the UK, especially in the area that I wanted to study, environmental science. Because what I was interested in was the whole of environment, ecology in its general form. So I looked at all the environmental science departments. They all study like geology, geography, physics, chemistry, biology. It's an interdisciplinary area and so forth. I said, yes, I found my place. I'm going to the UK. I went to my father. I said, Dad, I'm going to go to the UK. And then he said, I watched this film lately. The guy was going to the UK, and then he ended up crazy. I don't know, I want to lose you. I said, come on, I'm a grown-up person. I can do this. So, oh, yes, I'm sure you can do it. But you know what? If you stay here, I'll get you an apartment. I'll buy you a car. He said, think about all the girls and, all the great university life here and so forth. And I said, maybe so. I said, okay, I'll stay maybe. But what do I study then? Then I realized, looking at all the departments, they all started with geology. And I didn't have a clue about geology. And geology is earth science. It's our planet itself. How our planet came to be, the processes in it, how it was formed, and all the different kind of the evolution that has gone, and how everything that I studied throughout this evolutionary process came to be, all its fossil forms, to the sediments, to the lake environments, how the lakes were there, how the rivers were eroded. So if you want to do environmental science, of course it was the first thing that they wrote there, and I didn't have a clue, was geology. So I ended up studying geology. And it was fantastic, great stuff. And during the time when I was doing all this research, I had met the Minister of State responsible for the environment. And the Minister of State responsible for the environment had asked me to be his advisor. So also my first year when I started in geology, I became the advisor of the Minister of State for 1 year, where I was advising on what kinds of things he needed to do and implement in terms of conserving the environment. Then also while studying geology, I ended up founding the first bird watching club in Turkey. So this was essentially, there were no bird watchers in Turkey. I'm the 5th bird watcher in the country. Okay, so the first one was in 1975. Then the other 3 joined them in 1982, and then I became a bird watcher in 1983 or something like that. But this was pitiful because I knew that there were like more than 2 million bird watchers in the UK. I don't know, so many there. So I said, we need to start. I mean, in the Netherlands, there are at least 500,000 of them. And it's a small country like this big. Huh? So I said, how come this is a huge country, incredible bird diversity, no birds whatsoever, I'm going to build this bird club. So founded the first bird watching club, brought people together. It's funny because the Minister of State, because I was so enthusiastic about it, got also interested in it, and he joined one of our meetings. It was funny because the Secret Service first came in and searched all my apartment and made sure everything was all right, and then the minister came 2 hours later. So anyway, then after finishing my bachelor's and organizing all of this bird watching and so forth, I wanted to do a master's. So what do I do for a master's? I wanted to do, like we said from the very beginning, environmental science. And therefore, I applied for the Fulbright scholarship. I got the scholarship, and then I came to the US, to Ohio State University. At Ohio State University, I worked with the famous wetland scientist, because that was where my whole passion was, in wetlands, William J. Mitch. And there I got into modeling of ecological processes and how bird species would select in a marsh their nesting sites. After I finished my studies there, while doing that, I got also interested in artificial neural networks and in artificial intelligence, and started doing some modeling in that area as well, which then became one of the first papers ever doing this, and became a citation classic. Then I got a MacArthur fellowship. I also did the rounds and looked at different areas, but finally decided to go to the University of Minnesota. And there I got a MacArthur scholarship to do conservation biology, PhD. But then, at the time, I was starting to realize that environmental issues cannot really be solved by science itself. That the real thing, that the science existed actually. It was like huge. I mean, everything we know everything that we need to know to protect the environment. The only thing that we don't have to protect the environment is the will and the social organization to actually do this change, to make it a sustainable world. So it's not that we don't know about how the world works. So that's not what we're lacking. But what we're lacking is the social organization part. So that's why I also did a minor in development and social change. So that was my entry point. I took classes from even from public affairs. We're here in the public affairs department. I even got classes from political science, international relations, sociology, anthropology, you name it, from all the cross disciplines. And that has really helped me to understand all different kinds, because while I was doing that, I stumbled upon, because I'm working also on artificial neural networks and computer science, the nexus between anthropology, sociology, political science, and computer science, which was cognitive maps. Because when you looked in anthropology, they were working on cognitive maps. You looked in political science, Axelrod was one of the first people to come up with the notion of cognitive maps.
The same Axelrod?
Robert Axelrod from Chicago. So he was one of the people who wrote on first time on cognitive maps, of the cognitive maps of the political elite, even it's called the article. And then I looked at sociology. They were working on cognitive maps. My God. So I said, but everyone was working in their own silos. They didn't know anything about the health. The computer science were doing computer science, political science, all of them are separate. So what I did is I took all of them, harmonized all of their approaches, and built one approach to cognitive mapping, which is called the multi-step cognitive mapping approach, which became then another citation classic in the area, which I'm still asked to participate in PhD committees to go and be on the committee, because people are working on cognitive maps. So then, after I was finished with my PhD, I got offers from several places. But one was an interesting one that came from the center of Anatolia, where Turkey is. There's a town called Kayseri there, a university called RGS University. The rector there, while I was visiting, said, "Why don't you come here?" I said, "Why should I come here? I mean, it's this university in the middle of nowhere. I mean, why should I come here?" And he said, "Look, I'm not offering you anything. I can't give you anything. But think, would you like to, you know, dig down on the tip of a needle in one area, go more and more and more deep in any given place. Or here, we're in the middle of the steppe. Would you ride your horse across the steppe? Do you take the challenge of growing a rose in the desert without water? If you are willing and can do that, then I can offer you a position, I can let you build a department, you can create whatever you want, and whatever I can give, I will give you, but that's not going to be much. Oh, being the total, you know, emotional, idealistic, I don't know, stupid, idiot, you name it. I said, of course, I fell in love with the idea. And I came. And it was the craziest, most beautiful, most challenging time of my life. I stayed there 4.5 years. I graduated, and they are my pride. About 10 graduate students, 5 of them masters, 5 of them PhD students from Montpellier University, Oregon, Minnesota, and so forth, from all around the thing. I was always their co-advisors. And they're now working, continuing doing great stuff around. And then during that period, I founded the Civil Society Development Center so that civil society could develop, because organizing is the most important thing. During that period, I also founded Nature Society, which is BirdLife partner, which is a conservation to protect bird habitat so that bird populations can. It's the largest environmental coalition of the world, BirdLife International. Vogelbescherming in the Netherlands is a member of it. And then that is developed now. It's the 4th largest environmental NGO in Turkey. Did this research, published many papers, graduate students, organizing, building new institutions and so forth. And after 4.5 years, I got burned out. I mean, I was hardly sleeping during that period, which is not a good thing to do. Never do that, because that's what happens. You burn out. So when I burned out, I said, okay, what do I do now? So I said, maybe the UN is a good place, because it's a bureaucracy, defined work. There is, you know, you don't have to go on and do these big projects. So I said, maybe I should apply for the UN. And they were already kind of offering me a job at the period, so I ended up being an environmental specialist at the Global Environment Facility Small Grants Program in New York. I stayed there 2 years, and during those 2 years, I worked only 10 hours a day. I started doing, because I was burned out, I knew exactly what I wanted. I wanted to make sure that I don't burn myself out and rest. So I made like time sheeting. I didn't have to do that, but I did time sheeting. I did like meticulous accounting of everything that I did. You know, it was crazy. I had these spreadsheets which were showing this task, this many minutes, this task, this many minutes. I was going down to the 5-minute intervals. Everything accounted for in 5 minutes. So at the end of my 2 years, I had a beautiful sort of thing on how much time I had spent on what and how it resulted, whether it got really an output or not, whether I managed this or not. So, of course, this was like state of the art, I can tell you. I had a review. You know, in the UN, you have a very nice, good performance review system. The performance review system, they have all these answers and things. The way I could fill that in, 10 minutes, because I had all the data and everything that I was working on, was amazing. And I got like flying colors, probably the largest, you can imagine. 2 years afterwards, I received a phone call, and this guy who called me was the 5th richest man in Turkey. He had come to New York, and he wanted to talk to me. I said, why do you want to talk to me? He said, well, let's talk. Okay, I said. I gave him a address of a restaurant. We met there. and he said, I want you to come back to Turkey. I said, why should I come back to Turkey? Well, he started, I can't give you anything. I said, oh my God, I heard this before. No, that's not what he said. He said, okay, we're inviting you to be the new executive director of the largest environmental NGO in the country, which is Tema Foundation, with 155 employees, quite a sizable budget. Think about the things you can do with this organization, he said. And it's like stagnated. We really need a new blood. We need youthness to come into the organization, revive it, revitalize it, and carry it to the next area. So I wasn't very sure because, that's a huge struggle. It's a big organization. It doesn't look very well. They're like a bit getting old and so forth. Why should I want to do this and so forth? And he kept calling me, and we kept meeting in restaurants, and we kept talking about it. And one day we went to the Brooklyn Gardens, in the Botanical Gardens, which is beautiful. We looked at the flowers together. It was a nice, warm day, and we kind of started liking each other and so forth. And then at the end I said, okay, I'm coming. Then I went back to the UN. I said, I'm going, guys. Sorry, they've asked me for this job. And they said, why don't you stay? We will give you a promotion. Oh my God, so what do I do now? The UN is promoting me after 2 years. This is a bureaucracy. How can they come up with a promotion, boom, right away like that? That's incredible. Maybe I should stay. Should I stay or should I go? Should I stay or should I go? Oh, it was. What do you do? What would you have done? Okay, you think a bit. What would you have done?
I think I will weigh my options and then go for the one that I really want the most. Because
Well, you listen to your heart. Is that what you're saying?
yeah,
Okay. What would you have done?
I'd go back to Turkey.
Why?
I think because of the institutionalization of the UN and how slow it is to actually make changes. Like TEMA is a big bureaucracy as well, but I feel like introducing new blood and being able to lead that institution you'd be able to make a bigger change.
What would you have done?
Who was offering you more money?
The UN. I took a cut of 30%,
Where?
excluding benefits.
What organization did you feel like would help launch you to the next sort of step of your career? Did you have a sense of which one was going to be the?
I didn't have that's a good question which we can answer. Were you thinking of your career?
Yeah, I mean in terms of where. Yeah.
What would you have done?
I think I would have gone that same route. Where did I envision myself to be rather than being influenced?
Mm-hmm.
So step back and take the full view of where I want.
These are perfect career advisors, as you can see. They are telling you, think about the future. Where do you want to see yourself?
Or does it
Make your choice.
Fit into your plan better? If you have a plan.
If you have, guys, I didn't have a plan. I wasn't living according to a plan at all. I was living basically to do nature conservation and to contribute to the to protecting what I loved. Really, that was what was on my mind, and therefore it was more of an impact issue which was in my mind, and that's always what followed me in the whole thing. So I never saw myself anywhere. I never wanted to be this or that, or find myself in this position, or develop myself in a specific area. But I wanted, what was driving me was making the most impact, coming up with new things that could open up new doors, new possibilities. And that was kind of the driving force in me. So I ended up going to Tema Foundation, and I did exactly think of what's going to impact more and what really lies in my heart. I mean, I did listen to myself. I'm a true believer of that. Just to take a step back close your eyes, go in meditation mode, and say, take everything else. What is your true sense? What is your heart telling you should do? And then follow that. And don't worry, your heart is always influenced by your brain. Your heart is never pure. There's always an influence that flows from the brain to the heart. That's what I have discovered. And I think that's also what some of the neurophysicists these days also say. They also have a position on that. So I ended up Tema, an old organization. I could have done two things. I could have pretty much changed the whole organization inside out, because it was really a very calcified sort of organization. Or I could change it with the people that were there, with developing those people in many ways, which would have been difficult, more difficult at the on the long run, and the other one more difficult to start with, but then a lot easier afterwards. So what I did there is I chose to work with people, and the way I made that decision is also talking to this wise guy who had founded this empire of construction companies and fertilizers and bulbs or whatever, Tech Van Holding, which is one of the biggest capitals in the country. So I took his wisdom also, and he was a very sort of he was a non-radical guy, really. He wasn't a radical. He wouldn't do radical things. Although he built this whole thing, he didn't achieve all of those through radical behavior or through changing things completely, but rather with understanding, working with people, knitting partnerships, bringing things together, and so forth. So that was his advice to me too. So I took that, and it was 2 fantastic years. We did incredible stuff, and after that was at the end of it, 2 years, the organization had doubled its budget and tripled its visibility. During that period, of course, this whole new youth generation and so forth, doing things differently, the conservative forces in the foundation did sort of a counter-revolution. And what they did is they changed both the head of the board and of the board of trustees. So the head of the board became an ex-general, the head of the trustees became also an ex-general, and we had these 2 generals now leading an environmental NGO in terms of in the governance bodies, the most important two positions. At that point, I thought of Kurt Waldheim. Do you know Kurt Waldheim?
Vague memories.
Okay. What do you remember of Kurt Waldheim?
Nothing that I think is relevant in this context. I'm blanking on what it would.
Kurt Waldheim was the ex-president of Austria.
Yeah.
And he was a phenomenally important statesman. And he did an incredible amount of work, both for Austria and both for the world. When he was dying, when he died, there is, of course, in the New York Times an obituary, right? So you read the obituary. What does it say? It still talks. The man is in his grave now. When he was 23 years old, that he was working for the Nazis. The guy wasn't working for the Nazis. It was under Nazi occupation, and he had no other choice than to be there. But it was writing in his obituary all of that at the start. He didn't deserve this, but it was still there. So I thought, my God, 10 years from now on,
That will be yours.
they'll say, he worked with these 2 generals. You know? I mean, that would have basically disabled my whole reputation in the NGO world as being like the the convener, bringing people together, leading, making change, being somebody who is able to build organizations and work around those. I have formed a very good reputation by the time. That would have just basically killed my whole reputation. I could have worked with these generals quite well. They are rational people. And we could have continued in this great, work there. That day that happened, next day, put my resignation letter in front of the generals. Sorry guys, I'm gone. So we were, taking off at this moment. Here we were going to continue. Well, after I left, the organization took a dip. Then what I did is, I didn't alienate myself. I worked with the other people who were not with the generals, the other powers within the organization. And finally, working with them, also helping them to get renewed staff, now the organization is on the rise again. And I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud to see that organization continue and develop and become, because going a dip was showing that actually I wasn't doing a very good job. Because you as a leader would be doing a real good job if things run perfectly without you. That is true success. If you build a system in such a way that you become not needed. That is the ultimate success. So then, next week I received an offer from Greenpeace Mediterranean to be their next executive director. So I started an organization again in big debt, very small budget, institutional and crisis within the organization and so forth. And then we had a fantastic 5 years in which we pentupled 5 years. We pentupled the budget, which means like we started with 1 million, we ended up with 5 million at the end of 5 years. The reputation and the visibility the same way. And from zero, we created 2 million online supporters, which was the largest growth ever and the strongest new media and social networks and email presence in Turkey. From number 3, it rose all the way to number 4, all the way to number 1, the organization, in terms of its budget and in terms of its approach. TEMA was number 1, now TEMA is number 2. Greenpeace is number 1 right now in terms of all of these facilities, growing quite well. And this also happened at the regional level because it wasn't only Turkey. Greenpeace Mediterranean was also Lebanon, Israel, and so forth. They were wanting to, they were in the position to close the Lebanese office. I saved the Lebanese office during that period as well because I raised enough resources to save that office and not close it during that period, which was also something that I'm very proud of. And after 5 years, what happened is, when I was going into Greenpeace Mediterranean, I said, I'm coming only for 5 years, maximum 5 years. 3 is better, but maybe 5, but not more. Because in NGOs, you do not want to solidify power and have a leader for a long period of time. What that does is it kills the organization in many ways. One of them is you develop institutional blindness. You've dealt with the things that you can change, and with the things that you were dealing with and trying to solve but couldn't solve, you don't want to deal with them anymore. They become like a cyst, you can't open it up. And then I've essentially hired almost all of them with a 20% rate of increase. And when I first started, the turnover rate was 50%. And then I dropped that all the way to 20%, which was also another important issue. The turnover of staff, you don't want to have it that high. 20% is good. But with 20% turnover rate over 5 years, plus growth doubling of the total staff, what does that mean? That means I hired every single one of them.
Yeah.
So, which means I've solidified my power and my vision completely in the organization. Huh?
Dangerous.
That is a horrendously dangerous situation to be in.
By the way, shall we maybe another
Oh my
minute or
God.
so and then leave 15
I said I didn't want to talk about myself. There you go. Oh my God. But I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about the events. And it's usually the events outside of me. Events that I helped. So then I started, after 5 years, talking to ChangeADork, because they were coming into the Turkish market. And we were the strongest online campaigner, as a campaigning organization, as Greenpeace. So when somebody else comes there into the same market, as a good leader, you want to know them. You want to do some inquiry. So that's what I did. And it was also that I was looking for a job now, since I had finished my 5 years. And then they said, why don't you come to us? Well, I said, I have Greenpeace Med, it's doing fantastic. I'm at the, where I can, why should I leave, huh? But I finished my 5 years, so maybe I should go, huh? But if I go, what happens to the organization? Remember what happened with TEMA? They went down. Will this happen there as well? So I sat down and I made a calculation. I made a calculation of how much impact that I would do and what I could give with, ChangeADork, and what, if I would stay with Greenpeace, what contribution that I would do. I had seen that Greenpeace would go now, that I had built in the 5 years the system, that it would be continuing on its track forward. So there wouldn't be any loss. I imagined, let there be a 10% loss. There, that the slope goes down 10%. So you have a loss here. Look at the gains you have here when you're with ChangeADork. I looked at the things and I saw that impact analysis showed that being at ChangeADork would have produced a lot more positive impact, because with the civic activism that I would be able to raise at ChangeADork, I would then be able to help larger NGOs to incorporate that civic activism that's being raised into their grassroots. So ChangeADork would be actually a supportive organization of raising civic activism, but at the same time taking that civic activism and transferring it to larger NGOs to strengthen them overall. So I would benefit not only Greenpeace, I would benefit Greenpeace, TEMA Foundation, WWF, Amnesty, you name it, by doing this. And at the same time, I would raise the civic activeness, and the development of civil society, as you know, was a lifelong passion, starting with Civil Society Development Center, to my board membership at Civicus, the Global Alliance for Citizen Participation. So that is a line. So environment, civil society, and being able to do that kind of social change for a future that we all deserve to live in. Finished.
Well, I want to first give my colleagues a chance to.
Do we want all the students to ask
Or
first, and then if
do
there's
we-
time, I'll have.
Sure. Start with questions focused, if you can, around career.
Well, I can go unless someone has one. Well, you've worked for a number of amazing organizations that we often hear students talk about. They want to work for the UN, they want to work for Greenpeace. For you, a lot of this has happened they've approached you, which is not as common sometimes, especially starting out. So what advice would you have for those students who want to get into those organizations? What are some of the critical skill sets? Just what's the best way to get a foot in the door at organizations of that nature?
Mm-hmm. First of all, I would say follow your passion, because if you follow your passion, where you're really kind of are getting energy from, then that will lead you to wherever you want to be. So if you, I would say, don't shoot for organizations. I would say, shoot for for your passion and what you want to achieve in the world. Then the organization, whichever is the most appropriate for that, will come. I mean, I think of organizations like cups. You know, they're holder. They are holding people inside them, and through that they become like an organization. But what really happens is through either the interaction of individuals across many different cups, okay, or of the cups themselves with each other, which is then driven by individuals as well. So in that sense, I would say follow your passion and then really make good decisions in terms of doing the most contribution to your field and to people or to whatever that your passion is. And then that will be recognized. And people will come to you, essentially, if that's the case. That would be my suggestion. I have seen that if you go for the career and for the positions and for the institutions, usually the success is most of the time not a genuine one. You can wiggle yourself into any organization. I can give you the best tricks to do that. But do you want to do it? Don't do it. It's a bad idea. I mean, I think the best idea is to really be the best that you can, and then move in that direction.
But it is, Jennifer's point is, some students are looking first
Absolutely.
for prestige.
The name, they're looking for the
brand names.
and what you're saying is good because it reaffirms sort of what we tell them, that don't look necessarily at the organization or for the name, look for the type of work you want to do, get in on the ground floor wherever you can and sort of work your way up. But there are definitely students who say, I want to work for the World Bank, I want to work for the UN, and that's sort of their goal, which is fine. We say, okay, then, you know, we're going to support you however we can, but we know those are difficult places to get into, and so they're always looking for sort of tips and you know, what are the skill sets.
The most satisfying to work in, especially at the junior level.
Yeah.
That's what I tend to, because I used to work at the World Bank, and
But sometimes they have to learn
how
that
did you
themselves.
do that? And I'll say, well, I actually would not recommend it for you at the junior level, but that's the brand name.
I think it's a matter also of community. Certain organizations might be a community in which you want to be, and then to get to know those community members is a good idea, because you can only achieve certain things not as individuals, but within as being a member of a community, you can achieve things. I worked for Tema Foundation, but I still help Tema Foundation after I'm not the CEO anymore. I used to work for Greenpeace. I'm not at Greenpeace anymore, but I help Greenpeace all the time, wherever I can. The founder of Doğa Derneği, after the first board, I've left the society and haven't even been a board member since, but I help Doğa Derneği because it's also my baby. But besides that, but all of those form a community. And if they're not together, and if they're not acting as a community together, they can't achieve what they want to achieve. And that is also what is valid for institutions is also valid for individuals. For example, when I was at the University of Minnesota, there was the computer science department, a fantastic professor called Shashi Shekhar. He even became a member of the Academy of Science, that kind of really super scientist. And with Shashi, we met in a meeting where he listened to my stuff on artificial neural networks, and he said, Uygar, why don't we work on data mining together? I said, yes, let's do that. And then everything that we published some very prestigious, like 5 papers that came out, book chapters and conference proceedings. Computer science works a little bit different because their conference proceedings is actually more important than some of their journals. So we did some very, very important publications. But the way we did those publications was because Shashi was maintaining a lab of a team. There were several different people in that team which were working together, and there was me as the issue expert. So I wasn't a computer scientist, but I was an issue expert, and I was contributing to that team as an issue expert. Those 5 papers, without me, without any one of those members, without Shashi building that community, would have never been published or would have never been possible.
So it's like ecology.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. It's an ecosystem, and you have to be. It's a mutualistic system. It's not a. You have to be in a community. So getting into the right community might be as important to achieving your the outcomes that you would want as much as an organization. So you might look not for the University of Minnesota, but the lab of Shashi Shekhar at the University of Minnesota. That might be more attractive than the name.
The institution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's another point.
Other questions that anyone in the room would like to, or that you find useful to ask?
No, that's good.
Yes, it is.
Very
It's
interesting.
been a fascinating career.
So I think you were discussing the communities and also pointing out that you probably had mentors along the way
Mm-hmm.
that influenced your decisions in your career path, and I think those are really important connections to make along the way and keep. And it sounds like you kept those.
That's super important. Is like never ever forget the people that were your mentors and friends. I still today write to my PhD professor, Bill Cunningham, at the University of Minnesota. He was one of the fantastic people especially because he was there for me whenever I needed him, and because he opened and allowed me to do whatever I wanted to do. Because there can be professors who say, this is what I want you to do. And then there are professors, okay, this is maybe something that I learned from him now that I'm thinking. Servant leadership. He was a servant leader to me because he allowed me to realize the potential that I had in doing all of those studies at the University of Minnesota. He allowed me to work with computer scientists. He allowed me to do like some discrete event modeling with a completely different professor, Francie Cuthbert and Lauren Wemmer. Together we did work on discrete event modeling, which had nothing to do with my dissertation. Nevertheless, I did it, and it was published in Conservation Biology, which is a very good journal. And so what happened there is like he opened the doors and supported me in my quest. So I never forget Cunningham, and I will, write to him like once in a while and see how he's doing and so forth. The same thing with Nihat Gökyiğit, who brought me to Tema Foundation. I will call him from time to time. So I will keep those people which I have. Gratitude is something that always needs to be with you. I think what the ethics books or the nice things, the golden rule is always the best thing, huh? I don't like the passive one of it, which is like don't do unto others what you don't want to be done to yourself. So if you don't want to be if you don't want people to forget you, then you shouldn't forget people. So basically, if you use like the basic sensibility of our human qualities and you follow them, I think that always is don't look at it from a beneficial point only. Think of it your happiness, of making you feel the right emotional responses to something like that.
Well, let me flip that around for a moment. Do you think there's a relationship between your preference for servant forms of leadership and your own career trajectory? In other words, has the way, for instance, you work with people in TEMA Foundation, your choice to work with people rather than put them aside and hire primarily new people, that types of behavior styles, has that actually helped in your career, or is there not necessarily any relationship?
It has definitely helped. It has definitely helped. I think those kinds of, for example, if I go to TEMA Foundation today or after working, I am always received with a lot of respect and with a lot of enthusiasm and companionship, which is great, because then they have also, through all of that interaction, developed themselves and moved on. If I had eliminated and been like kind of the tyrant leader type person, or the very directive, I know it all, you guys don't, we do this type of person, might have also maybe led to success, but would have left a lot of broken and unhappy people, and I can tell you it will come and haunt you.
Bite you.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, I just suddenly realized there was a flip side to that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, but if you ask me why are you working now on servant leadership, it is because I have adopted all of those servant leadership things throughout my career and seen that they all work, and now it forms the term servant leadership forms a nice cup to put all of those in now.
Yeah, yeah. Any last questions? No? Well, then we want to thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.